Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar from Solutions for Networks, Mobile Device Management with Intune. We're excited to have you here today presenting. We have Tim Beamer, Chief Information Officer at Solutions for Networks. Today we're going to explore how Microsoft Intune helps protect corporate data, enforce security policies, and prevent unauthorized sharing on mobile devices. So throughout the webinar, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A, and we will answer those throughout the presentation. And with that, I will let Tim take over.
Thanks, Courtney. So my name's Tim Beamer. I'm the CIO at Solutions for Networks. I've been in the industry for 32 years now. And I got to watch mobile devices come up from the very beginning. So we'll talk about some interesting things today. What we'll really cover today is we'll talk about how did we get to where we are today. Let's take a little bit of a look back and understand some of the history around this. Talk about why mobile device management is important, because a lot of organizations that I've worked with in the past have either not done anything around mobile device management or have not done a very good job around it. We'll talk about some foundational steps that have to be taken, especially as you're looking at starting to get those mobile devices under management. Talk about some of the things we can manage, and we'll actually go through some of the screen caps from what it actually takes to get the mobile device into Intune and actually managed. So how did we get here? Well, back in 1999, a company called Research in Motion introduced something called the BlackBerry 850. That's that graphic at the top that looked kind of like a text pager. The BlackBerry 850 was revolutionary. It was a complete game changer because what it did was it gave access to your email from a mobile device, which previously was really not possible. Now, BlackBerry did some very interesting things when they rolled their platform out, because in order for you to use BlackBerry, you had to implement called the BlackBerry Enterprise Server, or the BES server. And that provided the connection from the device into your Exchange environment, or Notes, or whatever. But the idea was that there was a management server in the middle between the device and the actual email platform, which from a security perspective was actually good. Now, BlackBerry actually ran a proprietary network on the back end, and there were some issues over the years with BlackBerry's network going down and services not being available. The other thing that was kind of interesting about BlackBerry was when you set it up, and if you've been in the industry as long as I have, you maybe have seen this. When you first put the device on, it gave you an option as to whether you wanted to sync from email or from your Exchange server, or if you wanted to sync from the device. And the problem we ran into with that was that users would get a new BlackBerry and they would say sync from the device because that seemed to make the most sense. And the problem was no email or contacts or calendar information on the device, so it wiped out the user's inbox, which if you've ever had to restore an Exchange server, you know how painful that can be. So that created some issues. Now, eventually those got resolved and it became a lot easier to use BlackBerry. And the BlackBerry Enterprise Server from a mobile device management perspective is actually a pretty good platform, especially considering they were the first ones out of the gate. In 2001, Microsoft came out with something called Pocket PC, and they also came out with something called Mobile Information Server. Mobile Information Server basically, from a functional perspective, did part of what the BlackBerry Enterprise platform did in the fact that it provided that middle piece to get from an Exchange server to a mobile device. I did a project for the state of Pennsylvania back in that time frame where we used HP iPAQs and a cellular card through Verizon, I believe it was. And at that point in time, we were able to connect email from the HP iPAQ platform into Exchange email. And with the cellular card and the cellular networks that were available at the time, we got a whopping 17K connection. So yeah, it was a bit slow. But the idea was now Microsoft had a platform that competed with the BlackBerry Enterprise Server and allowed for other devices to connect into Exchange. In 2003, Motorola released a device called the MPX 200, and it ran a new operating system called Windows Mobile 2003. So now we have the first Windows Mobile operating system. It's the flip phone icon you see in the slide here. It was a very innovative platform. It actually worked pretty well considering what it was and the technology we had available for us at the time. It did require a mobile information server to connect into Exchange, but the reality was it worked. We didn't have a huge amount of management capabilities, though. It was pretty much we can connect you in, and if you leave the organization, we can wipe the device. Well, there's issues with that, and we'll get to that in a minute. 2003 Exchange 2003 shipped with something called RPC over HTTP connectivity. Today it's called Outlook Anywhere, but the idea was now we didn't need mobile information server anymore. We could connect directly into the Exchange server, which introduces its own set of problems because now I'm connecting directly into a platform that has to be available on the internet, and there's issues with securing that. Windows Mobile 5 came out in 2005, and Singular released a device called the 3125. I actually had one of those. Again, pretty good device, did what it needed to. Limitations in terms of how much we could actually control. In 2007, Apple completely changed the game when they released the iPhone. So now we had a true smartphone platform with various applications that could be developed for it. And the iPhone could leverage that RPC over HTTP connectivity or Outlook Anywhere to connect into Exchange for your email. The only email client available at that time was the native iOS phone or iOS mail client. It was okay, but again, with the controls that we had natively within Exchange 2003, we didn't have a lot of management capability. Again, we could wipe a device, but you're wiping the device. In 2008, Android entered the chat, and so now we had a new mobile operating system. And again, native email client capabilities. 2010, the Windows Phone 7 released. It was a new UI called the Metro UI. Apple and Android at that time also began offering some basic capabilities on their platforms for mobile device management. And mobile device management, again, at that point in time was basically I can see the device, I can do some limited controls on it. Apple had a little more capability than Android did at that time, but again, not a whole real suite of features. So in 2011, Microsoft released Intune MDM, so management from the cloud. And we actually started to be able to get real control over some of these devices. And there were some third-party add-ins that you could use depending on whether you were Android or iOS. In 2012, the last version of Windows Phone 8.1 released, iOS 6 released, and this is when we really started to get a handle on how we could manage mobile devices. Because iOS 6 released with a whole new suite of management APIs that gave us a lot more ability to look into the operating system on a mobile device and provide more control. So that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are today. And mind you, I've left a huge gap in there of about 13 years, but that's okay because now it's getting into refinement after this. When you look at where mobility came out of, really what was driving mobile devices connecting to your corporate network, what started it all was email. Everybody wanted to have email all the time. Why people want to have email all the time, I don't know, because personally, when I leave this office, I don't want to have access to my email, even though I do, but I'd like to be able to just turn it off. So why is it so important that we actually look at mobile device management? Some organizations out there will still purchase and manage devices for their users. So it'll be a corporate-owned device, but the shift in device ownership over the years has really been towards bring your own device or BYOD. So, for instance, in our organization, we provide a stipend to our employees. They can go out and get whatever the phone they want. But again, because it's connecting to corporate data, I want to have the ability to control it. I want to make sure from a corporate information sharing perspective that my users can't cut and paste something out of an email or from a Teams site or SharePoint site or whatever and drop that into their Facebook feed or X or whatever we're calling Twitter this week or Instagram or whatever. I want to have a division between what's corporate data and what's personal data. And I want to be able to make sure that the corporate data can't just be copied and pasted into somebody's social media apps or their personal application. I want control over that. And if the person leaves the organization, I want to have the ability with that segmentation to be able to say, if this person leaves the organization, I want to wipe their corporate data off, but I really don't. First off, I don't care about their pictures of their, you know, kids or grandkids or dogs or cats or goldfish or whatever it is. I want to be able to just control wiping the corporate data. I don't want to impact their personal stuff because again, they own that device. So I want to leave them the ability to kind of lead that. The other thing is a lot of people out there still haven't put any antivirus solution on their phones. Oh, it's a phone. Nobody writes viruses for iOS or Android. That's not necessarily the case anymore. So how do we make sure that they actually are running some type of antivirus or anti-malware application on their phone? The other thing you can run into with as applications continue to move forward at an ever faster pace, how do you make sure that the right or supported application or version of that application is actually installed on your end user devices? So I want to make sure they have the right version. I want to make sure they actually got the right app. I want to make sure they didn't just go out to the Apple Store or the Google Play Store and pick an app that looks sort of like what it's supposed to be in my environment. I want to make sure they get the right app so that I know that if they connect to my corporate data, that data isn't going somewhere else. And of course, all of this is based in zero trust, right? As I've told every one of the users on our system here at Espernets, it's not that I don't trust you, it's that I don't trust anybody. That's what zero trust is all about. When we set up a device under management in Intune, we are doing device segmentation. So there's a personal part of the device, and that's got your personal email and all your social media apps and all your pictures of your dogs and cats and goldfish and whatever. And then there's a part that's corporate data. Corporate data is going to be your corporate email and access to Teams and access to corporate applications, line of business applications, whatever it is. But the idea is that there is a dividing line in that device that says this part is corporate, this part is personal stuff. And we want to make sure that's a very clear line that can't be crossed. And as I mentioned before, on that deprovisioning side, number one, I want to be able to make sure all the corporate data is removed, but at the same time, because it's not a company-owned device, I want to make sure the only data that we're removing is company data. Now, I know this is a little bit hard to read, but what we're looking at here is from a foundational perspective. Both iOS and Android require you to set up connections into Intune. iOS is actually a little bit easier because iOS, you just have to set up a what's called an MDM push certificate. And really, that's a matter of going out to Apple, setting up an Apple ID if you don't have one already, requesting a certificate, and running through the process that's very well documented in Intune. Once that push certificate is there, that allows you to connect to the APIs on the iOS side and provide management through Intune. Google Play is a little different because Google Play requires requires access into the directory, requires access into Entra AD. So it's a little different. Again, it's not too difficult to set up, but it works a little differently. Instead of just being a cert that has to be pushed out, it's actually looking for a connection into your Entra environment to give you that level of control that you need. But those foundational steps have to be in place before you can put the devices under management. If you don't have the connection through Google Play, if you don't have the Apple MDM push certificate, then you still don't have the ability to get access to the APIs on the device to be able to control them. So those foundational steps are absolutely critical to move forward with management. Once those are in place, then we can start developing policies. And policies are really how we define what it is we want to manage. There's well over 200 different settings in there. No, I haven't memorized them all, and no, it's probably not going to happen by tomorrow either. But the idea is that there are a huge amount of settings in there that we can control on these devices. Typically, what we're looking for, and kind of, if you will, the start point is I want to have control over a certain set of settings. Number one, I want to make sure I control the idle timeout. so that if somebody is out at a coffee shop meeting somebody for whatever, they're having a meeting there or whatever, and they take their phone and they look at something, they set it down on the table, we want to make sure that device times out in a reasonable amount of time so that there's not data being displayed on it that people shouldn't be able to just walk by and read. We want to make sure we set what we want our pin length and complexity to be. Typically, what we're looking at is at least a 6-digit pin. Now, if you want to enforce alphanumeric complexity in there as well, you can. Your users might not appreciate it, but again, the idea is you have the ability to make sure those pin codes are a lot harder to guess. Hardware settings. So I can take a look and view the hardware associated with this, and I can make available certain settings from a hardware perspective in terms of, do I want to control access to the camera? In certain environments, especially in high security environments, you don't want the camera to be available. You don't want people taking pictures of the thing you're building in your facility that's going to be sold to the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense doesn't want you to have that camera available either. So, we can turn the camera off, actually. Updates, just like you do with your Windows devices and your Apple devices from an endpoint perspective, Mac devices, we want to make sure that the devices are getting updated on a regular basis and keeping up with what the latest patches and OS updates are that are available for those devices. The big thing is the idea of sandboxing. And sandboxing is saying we're dividing this device into two parts, corporate and personal, and we want to make sure that that information can't move from one area to another. The other thing we want to make sure we block for is jailbroken devices. What's a jailbroken device? That basically means that someone went out, figured out how to hack the hardware, and they're putting an unsupported operating system on there. This has gotten a lot more difficult over the years, but it used to be very popular back in the day, where someone would put out a version of an operating system for a mobile device that they had kind of gone in and changed and modified and made it look different or added some capability or whatever it was. But the idea is that that device was no longer under the management of the APIs associated with the phone. The other thing with a jailbroken device is, since you can't control it, you can't control what the user does on it. The other thing is, if you don't know how the operating system that they're running on it was developed on a jailbroken device, you also don't know what happens to the data when it gets on that device. It could be going anywhere. So blocking jailbroken devices is pretty important as well. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the settings picker there, and you can see there's information on various things from an account perspective, authentication, device management, networking. You can go in and set up specific connections to VPN or to your particular corporate network when they're in the office. You can even make printers available to them if you want. And then there's various policies and security components that can be configured as well. Now, below that, there's this capability to say, allow the device to move information from managed to unmanaged. And basically, that's saying, do I want to allow this device to move things from the corporate side to the personal side or not? We want to block that. And we want to make sure that we have a list that says, these are the only applications that can control or work with corporate data. And then down at the bottom, you can see I put a snipping in there that allow camera. I want to allow the camera or not. Again, if you're in a high security environment, maybe you want to turn that off. So again, there is a huge amount of settings in there. There's a tremendous amount of customization in there. One thing I usually have told customers over the years is start simple, build up from there. If you start too complex, there is the potential that you can render the device less than useful. And that's that delicate balance we strike with security every day. How do I control what I need to control without making the device more difficult to use or so difficult to use that the user can't get access to their information? A couple questions have popped up. So what kind of encryption is used for securing data on mobile devices managed through Intune? So there is encryption at rest, and there's also encryption in transit. You have the ability to set up the corporate side so that that environment is encrypted at rest as well. That's typically the way I would recommend it. And again, the other question that's on here is major challenges around BYOD, post corporate IT security. It comes down to what your users tolerate from a management perspective. Because, and again, this depends on how your organization works, because in our environment that we look at our devices as being quote unquote funded through a stipend, then we want to have the ability to control it. In some organizations, and I've seen this in union-based organizations, they also want the ability to say, because technically as a union employee, if I access my email when I go home, I have to be paid for that time. So in some instances, we have to look at that as well. There's a lot of different ways to do it. A question came in, if a camera is disabled on a BYOD, is it all the time or is it just for corporate applications? The answer is yes. So usually if you were to disable the camera, you're disabling that camera, period, and it's not going to be available. Question about conditional access in Intune. Conditional access is all about who gets access to what, when, and how. Conditional access is really designed, and this is a separate conversation, but I'll briefly touch on this. Conditional access allows you to define a policy to determine what level of access a user gets depending on when they're signing in, where they're signing in from, what network they're on, what device they're on, and what application they're using. So when you look at those parameters, I can say if you're on a Windows laptop or desktop, you have access to this and you can read it and edit it and do whatever you need. But if you're accessing it from your home PC, which is not a managed device, you can only read it. You can't edit it. You can't copy and paste out of it. I'm not going to let you print it at home, all those kinds of things. Or if I'm accessing on a mobile device, I maybe have a different set of permissions. Conditional access is all about defining the conditions and then defining what the level of access is you need on it. And that's pervasive through Intune as well as through anything that's in the Microsoft cloud. Application management. So when we talk about mobile devices, we typically talk about MDM, mobile device management, and MAM, mobile application management. Application management is all about defining what applications do I want to push out to these devices that I have connecting to my network. Those could be corporate apps, and they could be line of business apps. They could be things associated with Office 365. So for instance, the way I have the environment set up today, we rolled out iPads to a number of our salespeople. The way it's set up is once that device comes under management, then at that point in time, we automatically deploy a set of applications out to it. So they get Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, all those things for iOS. The other thing we do is we also push the Defender for Endpoint client out to those so that we know that there is an antivirus solution or an anti-malware solution running on those devices at all times. Again, as I mentioned before, the vast majority of folks that I know that if their device isn't under management, they don't even bother running an antivirus solution on their mobile device. Good, bad, or otherwise, that's the reality of the situation. Again, from an encryption perspective, we encrypt that, or we have the capability to encrypt corporate data at rest, but we also have the ability to encrypt data in transit. And one of the things that Intune can push as part of a mobile device management policy is a VPN connection into Office 365, so that it is we know that it's a fully encrypted tunnel and it's highly secure. We also have the ability to force authentication, so forcing the use of multi-factor authentication for access into any corporate data, including Outlook. So for instance, right now I'm running a policy and test that we'll be rolling out shortly, where every time I open Outlook on my iOS device, it checks for facial recognition to make sure I am who I say I am. So you have the ability to have additional capabilities there. It all comes down to how far do you want to go and how secure do you need to be. And a lot of that is based on your corporate risk profile and your corporate tolerance for risk. The last thing with application management is the ability to wipe. So making sure we can wipe that corporate data without impacting any personal apps or any question came in, what's the best Microsoft fundamental device offering basic MDM Windows capabilities? Not sure exactly what we're looking there, but I'll tell you that the management capabilities between iOS and Android are pretty much like for like. And it's giving you a level of control that's very similar to what you can do with a Windows desktop or a Mac device. So you've got the full range of capabilities there for any of those devices to control just about everything you need. Now, there's some esoteric things from a Mac perspective that may require a third-party solution to be tied into Intune, like Jamf, but that's you're getting pretty far ahead if you're having to do that. So, how do we get a mobile device under management? Well, the first we have to go through those foundational steps. I got to make sure that I'm connected to Apple or Google, so that I have access to the management APIs and I can connect to those devices and push a management profile. Then we define a management profile and a compliance policy. Those are two different things. The management profile is what are the things that I want to push in terms of settings and whatnot. The compliance policy deals with the pin length, what version of the operating system do you use, those kinds of things. Once that's in place, then the end user will load the company portal app. And there is a company portal app for both, excuse me, for both iOS and Android. And you can see in the graphic, I think this is on an Android device, but I could be wrong. They all kind of run together after a while, but at any rate, they look similar for either device. Basically, if you go into the Google Play Store, if you go into the Apple App Store, do a search for Company Portal, and you'll see the Intune Company Portal app. Once you have that in place and you load that application, then the user has to sign in. When the user signs in with their credentials into your environment, then it's going to set up access. And access, one of the things we do is we tell you, here are the things that we can see on your device, and here are the things that we cannot see on your device. So I can see all the corporate stuff, but what I'm showing you in the graphic on the far right-hand side of this screen is here's the list of things that I can't touch, and for the most part, I really don't care about. I don't care about your Angry Birds. I don't care about your Bejeweled. I don't care about your pictures of the neighbors, best friends, dog walkers, son. None of that matters to me. What I care about is your Outlook email that's associated with our organization, the data that we have in SharePoint Online, the data that we have in Teams, or maybe the data that we have in other corporate line of business applications. Question came in, is there much user pushback against facial recognition for MFA? Depends on who you talk to. Again, it's not like facial recognition is storing a picture of you and putting it out in the cloud associated with your name or anything like that. It's storing a set of data points associated with what your face looks like. So yeah, there's going to be people who get weird about it, but there's other options for MFA if you don't want to use facial recognition. You can use PIN codes. You can use a callback where it actually calls the device and you answer it and tells you to push the pound sign. You can have it send you a SMS message with a verification code in it. There's more than one way to skin that cat, depending on what your users want to be able to do. And you can always give your users multiple options and allow them to choose what they're most comfortable with. So once we've agreed and seen what we can and cannot do from a mobile device management perspective, then we set up the access into the corporate environment. And it downloads a management profile. The management profile contains all the settings and all the things that we have configured in that management profile to manage on the device. Once that's downloaded, then you actually have to go in and enable the management profile. So this is not they load the corporate, the Intune company portal app and then sign in and they're done. There's several other steps that you have to go through to get the device under management, or that the user has to go through, I should say, to get the device under management. Typically, what we've done in the past, what I've done in the past, what I've even done is we've rolled this out to our user environment, is I have a Word document with all the screenshots on it and all the explanations on it that walks them through in a step-by-step process. Here's everything you're going to have to do. Click here, type this in, do whatever. I've got that in a Word document so that the users can follow along as they go through the process. So the management profile comes in. We then have to say, yes, it's okay. I want to use this management profile. They download the profile, it gets installed. Once that's installed, then we'll start to see some other things start to happen. And so what you start to get to as you go down through this is there will be a certificate installed. That certificate is the Intune root authority. Basically, what that does is that certificate allows us to manage the device at the device level. Once that is in place, then we have to trust that certificate. So you got to do the trust on it. You'll see the profiles installed. And then the next thing you can do is, the way I have this set up, is I have it set up to automatically configure the email client, the Outlook client, to connect to their corporate email account. So then it'll ask for the password for that Exchange account or Exchange Online account, so that they can get access to their email. Once that's done, then it's going to go ahead and go through the authentication process. It'll authenticate for email access. And then once that's done, it says, well, okay, you're all set. Well, you are and you aren't, right? There's a couple other things that you have to go through to finish doing some of the other things you want. So, for instance, I've got this deploying a number of applications, not just Outlook, but we're also deploying Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, and the OneDrive client and OneNote. So again, we're looking at a number of different applications that we're downloading and putting on. So those come down in the background. You don't need to worry about that. Usually it takes a couple minutes for those to come down, depending on how you're connected. But then the next thing I do is I go in and I say, we're going to push the Defender client because I want to make sure I have an anti-malware solution on my device. So you'll see the screen comes up for the Microsoft Defender client. Of course, everybody agrees to the terms of use without reading them, which is fine. And then once that client gets installed, then Defender can set up that local VPN connection. So what this does is it makes sure that we are encrypting the browser sessions and encrypting any sessions going back to Office 365. So that VPN connection gets configured. We allow it. Once it's allowed, now I not only have Defender on here, but I also have a VPN connection on. And that allows us to really get control of that device. Now I can push additional applications over time if I need to. If I need to have the iOS or Android version updated, it'll update all that. I can make sure that I look at other things in there. Do we have the latest version of the OneNote client on there, the OneDrive? Do I have the latest version of Word, PowerPoint, Excel on there? All those things can happen about that. Question came in corporate Intune compliance policy. What's the encrypted security access device? Not sure what that question means, but in the corporate Intune compliance policy, what we're doing is actually encrypting the corporate section of the device. So the corporate data becomes encrypted from a data at rest policy on that device as well. A couple of the other things that we may look at as you go down the road and you're setting things up. So additional application deployments, as I mentioned, I have those set up to happen in the background. Once it's under management, all those applications deploy automatically. Usually takes about 5 or 10 minutes for them to get down to the device. So it's actually pretty quick when you think about it. And then you can see that I can go in and I can monitor compliance of those devices. So I can go in and I can say, okay, let me look at my devices and make sure they're compliant. And if you look at the graphic on the left-hand side, what we're really looking at there is, do I have the right, are they compliant for password length? Are they compliant for simplicity or complexity? Are they compliant with the maximum amount of time after the screen lock goes in before you have to re-enter the password? How many minutes of inactivity do we have before the screen lock hits? Do we require a password to unlock the device? What kind of password are we looking for? Are we monitoring to make sure none of our devices are jailbroken devices? So I can look at that dashboard and I can find out, are my devices compliant or not? And based on if I see a device that's not compliant, if it's not compliant, then I can go ahead and kick it out of the environment. I also have in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you can see the policy I have in there specific to iOS around updates. So I have an update policy that basically goes out and checks to see if updates are available for the iOS client. You can do the same thing with Android, and I have a like policy for Android that says go out, take a look. If there's a new version, let the user know that there's a new version so that they can go ahead and make sure that gets installed and push it out. So again, really what we're looking at is how do we make sure that we take these mobile devices that now have access into our corporate environment and our corporate data to make sure we actually have control over them and we control the access level that they have and we control the access to the data. We make sure that the data is encrypted. We make sure that the connectivity is encrypted. And we make sure that if a user leaves the environment, we have the ability to go in and wipe that data off. Again, from a historical perspective, BlackBerry Enterprise Server was way ahead of the game on this. They did a much better job in managing devices than anybody else did. And it took a long time for Microsoft to catch up specifically. It really wasn't until around 2012 when Intune MDM came out that we started to have the capabilities that we had had in BlackBerry for a long time. BlackBerry, unfortunately, if you haven't noticed lately, you really haven't seen a lot of BlackBerry devices because they really don't exist anymore. So even though they were first to market, they failed to keep up with user interface and technology uh, improvements and kind of just went by the wayside. But they did at one point in time really have the go-to solution. What was fascinating about that was even though they were first, they didn't last. But the other thing was from a device perspective, they really had some innovative devices. Long story short, we are where we need to be right now in terms of having the capability to control our devices through Intune and MDM and like mobile application management as well. Just a matter of making sure you get things set up and then enforcing and getting people access to it. Now, the flip side of this is right now we're rolling this out internally, that's for that's, and we're doing it initially on a I'm going to send you the instructions and you're going to put your device under management. Long term, what will happen, or I should say longer term, not very long, but the way this will work is I'll set up a conditional access policy. And the conditional access policy will basically be something to the effect of if you have an iOS or an Android device and it's not under management, I'm going to block access. So the idea is number one, in our environment, and again, your environment is probably different, but in our environment, we provide a stipend to our end users for their mobile device usage because they do use their devices for corporate activities. But because we provide that stipend and we are providing funding for them to have a mobile device, that means that device will be monitored, managed, and updated according to our policies. And if they're not willing to live with our policies, then that device will no longer be able to connect to the environment. And that's a staged rollout. And it continues to go forward as we go through the process. Question came in when updates are made to a device management policy, how long does it take for that change to actually occur on the device? And when a wipe request is made, how long does that take to actually occur on the device? So I'll say it's less than 5 minutes in a general sense. Obviously, if the device is not connected to a network, let's say you're on an airplane and you're in airplane mode, then when you light the device back up, one of the first things that will happen is the Intune client, that corporate um, that corporate app will go through and check back in. And when it check backs in, if there's a wipe request, it happens immediately. And if it's something around, I gotta push an application out, same thing. It's checking to see if there's changes to the policy, and if there are, then those are applied as soon as they see them. But generally, if you're pushing something out to a device and it's connected to the network, you're looking at a span of time that's measured in minutes. It usually doesn't take too long. Pretty quick, actually. And it's a lot better than the way it used to be. So there's been massive improvements there. No question. So in closing, mobile device, this is a significant threat vector. If you have mobile devices in your environment, if you're allowing users to connect under a BYOD type platform, those devices need to be under management. You need to have control over them. You need to make sure there's an antivirus client on them. You need to make sure that the company data is separated away from their personal data. And it's not necessarily that people want to do bad things. It's just sometimes people do things without thinking. So we want to prevent them from making mistakes that we can prevent them from making. The devices that you secure in a BYOD environment can be done without impacting access to personal data and personal applications. Like I said, I don't care about Angry Birds, Bejeweled, your pictures of your goldfish or your iguana or your reticulated python or whatever it is you have at home. I really don't care about any of that. What I care about is making sure that your access into corporate data is secure. Planning is an absolute priority. This is not something you go in at 8 o'clock in the morning and say, okay, today we're doing mobile device management and I'm going to roll this out by the end of the day. That's a good way to do it and create all kinds of bad things happening. So you want to make sure you plan out, number one, what do you actually want to be able to control? What do you need to be able to control? And how are you going to control it? Once you have that plan and that design, then it's a matter of testing it before you do a broad rollout. We're not even going to roll this out globally at one shot. We're going to do this in a staged approach. I'm going to do this team by team to make sure if we do run into an issue, then that issue can be remediated without impacting the entire organization. So testing, staged rollouts, all those are critical to success. You want to make sure you do this in a very measured fashion. Don't try to just shotgun this thing. Our call to action today, number one, when's the last time you had somebody take a look at your Microsoft 365 environment and review the configuration and make sure you're doing all the things you need to do, but also making sure that you're taking advantage of all the entitlements that you have with the licenses that you have in place? If you haven't had that done, that's something that we do for a number of organizations. Typically, depending on the size of the environment, that the cost associated with that is typically around, let's say, around $5,500 for us to come in and take a look at your environment and review it and make sure that, number one, you're taking advantage of the things you own and you're paying for, and number two, making sure that they're not glaring security holes in the way your environment is set up. I've seen this done by other organizations where they call it a secure score review. We go a lot farther than that. Secure score is good, but it's not the end all be all. That's why when we do one of these assessments, number one, there's a cost associated with it. Number two, we're a lot more thorough when it comes to how we go through this. So yes, we started secure score. We also look at identity scores. We also look at how you're doing things from an endpoint device management. We're also looking at the configuration of how you have your email environment set up. We're also looking at how you handle things from a defender perspective. There's a lot of parameters that we're looking at in there that go way beyond secure score. Now, if we find issues in anybody's organization and they ask us to come in and do remediation for those, we're more than happy to do that. We're also more than happy to hand the report back to you and let you fix it yourself. If you want us to do it, typically what we'll do is we'll discount the remediation based on the cost associated with the actual assessment. If you want to do that, reach out to us. Courtney will be more than happy to get you in touch with the right person to schedule a conversation around that. The next thing is we can do that. We can help you get your mobile estate under control. So if you haven't gotten that done yet, we're more than happy to come in and review how you've done Intune today and how you're managing mobile devices today. Or if you haven't done anything yet, we're more than happy to help you come in, plan, test, and do a staged rollout. If you go through and have us do a tenant assessment for you, again, that's a paid engagement, but if you do that, you will receive a $100 Amazon gift card. So thanks for sitting in on our webinar today, as well as engaging us to do that environmental configuration assessment and go through. Question did come in, how can one best review Intune on BYOD management? There's some very good tools out there that are native into the platform, and also the Microsoft Learn channel out on YouTube, as well as their articles in Microsoft Learn online. They've done a pretty good job at documenting things. Now, again, that documentation is typically written at a 400 level. So if you haven't done it before, you don't know what you're looking at, it can get a little complex. But again, by all means, if this is something that you'd like us to help your organization with, we're here and we're more than happy to help out. Our contact information is on the last slide here. There's also a QR code there if you want to scan the QR code to our website. Again, if you have any questions, if you'd like to schedule a tenant assessment, you can always reach out to info@s4nets.com. Do I have a top 5 recommendations for an organization rolling out Intune for the first time? Well, I think I pretty well covered them. The top 5, really, when you look at it, comes down to number 1, making sure you've defined what you want to be able to control on those devices based on access that you want to give them into your corporate network. Number 2 is working through those policies and making sure that implementing those policies is not going to restrict access to something that you want to still grant access. Number 3, and this goes across the board, it's not just with Intune, this is with everything, multi-factor authentication. If you have users that are authenticating to your Office 365 or Azure environments today without using multi-factor authentication, you're behind the times, and you really need to move forward on that. Again, that's another one of those things that we help a lot of organizations out with. That's one of the things that's definitely a huge data point when we do an environmental assessment of somebody's M365 environment or their Azure environment, is whether or not multi-factor authentication is enabled for all users. Number 4, what's the rollout plan looks like? Who gets this first? What things are we looking at from a testing perspective? What do we want to make sure works, doesn't work? And then number 5, do a staged roll. But the big thing is making sure up front you understand what you want to control and what level of control you want to have with those various parameters that you have. Like I said, there are well over 200 settings out there that are available for both iOS and Android. You don't need to turn them all on. Make sure you understand precisely what you're looking for. That's really all I have for today. I appreciate everybody joining the webinar today. I appreciate the questions that came in. Some very good questions we saw today. And likewise, if you have additional questions, reach out to us. We're more than happy to help out any way we can. Courtney, anything else today?
Well, thank you, Tim, for presenting to us today, and thanks everyone for joining us. I will be sending out a webinar recording to everyone who attended today. As Tim mentioned, if you would like to sign up for a M365 tenant assessment, you can reach out to us at info@s4nets.com, or you can visit our website at s4nets.com. And thank you everyone for attending.